Hello and welcome to Inclusive Gathering Birmingham. I'm Nets, my pronouns are she, her. Inclusive Gathering is a learning community based on the radical inclusion that we see Jesus modelling. So, as you come today, know that whatever your race or ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, background, HIV status, ability, disability, neurodiversity, theology, or political conviction. At IGB, you are loved, welcomed, and fully included. Today, David and Faith will be discussing healing. But first, let's have some music.
Can we just admit together we're not fine? 'Cause I'm not fine, and you're not fine. Can we just admit together we're afraid? 'Cause I'm afraid, you're afraid. Can we just admit together we have doubts? 'Cause I have doubts. Do you have doubts? Can we just admit together we're not free? 'Cause I'm not free. I wanna be. If you're not free, then sing with me. Emmanuel, God with us today. We desperately cling to your name. Emmanuel, as near as our need, as close as the air that we breathe. Can we just admit together we have failed? 'Cause I have failed, you have failed. Can we just admit that our hands are unclean and our hearts unclean, and I'll never be till we're free?
Our reading today is Luke chapter 18, verses 35 to 43, taken from the NIV. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening, and they told him, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." He called out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord, I want to see," he replied. Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight. Your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. And when the people saw it, they also praised God.
David, I'm part of Inclusive Gathering here in Birmingham, and my pronouns are he, him.
Hi, I'm Faith. I'm also a member of the community at Inclusive Gathering in Birmingham, and my pronouns are she, her.
Yeah, and today we're looking at this passage and generally talking about healing.
So, David, in the passage that Net's just read from Luke, did you have thoughts on healing, or what were your initial thoughts on the passage?
Yeah, I was thinking, some people think, and the healings didn't actually happen, but I tend to think that Jesus did do some amazing things, but it does raise some interesting questions, such as if you see Jesus did these healings and the apostles did the healings, so there's a continuation of that. And there's passages in the New Testament where it talks about the gifts that God gives us, and includes in that miracles, faith, and healing. In James, where he says, if anyone is sick, he should call the elders of the church and they should anoint with oil, and the prayer of faith will make someone well. And so it does appear that it wasn't just Jesus. It was something that continued through, to some extent, I think, throughout church history. We see some healings with the mystics and so on. And more recently with the Pentecostal movement and the charismatic movement, we've begun to reclaim that. And so it does appear that this is not just something Jesus did, but something that can happen today, and something that can be done today. But that in itself raises some questions, in that I've been in churches like this, and I've seen people pray and even speak to someone, as Jesus did here, receive your healing, and command a healing, and things like that. And the early apostles did that. And yet sometimes, some amazing things happen, but other times people don't get healed, and people feel, was it my lack of faith? Was it what went wrong? Why doesn't it work? And maybe that can really harm their faith, in thinking, well, perhaps I don't believe this. And yet other people can be really blessed and helped and encouraged. And it seems the loving, caring thing to do. And I think a lot of people accept that. So I think that's where I am with that. What were your thoughts, Faith?
Yeah, so similar to you, I've been in environments where people pray for healing very openly. And that's actually something that I've experienced myself, both physical and spiritual healing in different, in church contexts. And I've heard testimonies of others who've had the same. And at the same time, I know a lot of cases where people asked for healing and it didn't come. And so, yeah, that raises, and including myself. And so that raises important questions. So one way that I've heard this expressed is through something called a kingdom theology, which is this idea of there's the now and there's the not yet. So because we're living in this kind of in-between time, there's this idea of what we experience now. You might not always get healing, there could be signs of it, but there's this promise of the not yet, where there will ultimately be fulfillment, and with the resurrection and the restoration.
I do think there's an important, there's some important good practice, if you like, in this story with Jesus, in that Jesus asks the man, what do you want? Because people can feel pressured, or can feel that healing is pushed on them. And I have seen it sometimes hyped up as well, with music, with atmosphere, particularly in bigger meetings. And so I think there's elements of that where we need to be cautious.
So hopefully this isn't too distracting, that I'm like sitting in a different environment between cups, but there we are. So it's just a little quieter back here. So getting back to your point about, yeah, so the fact that the man basically chases Jesus down and is asking for this, I think is really significant. So yeah, people's agency is always very important in terms of healing. And here it's clear that the man is requesting healing and asking for it. So there's a theologian named Amos Young, who he's a Pentecostal theologian, and he's done work about disability theology. And his brother has Down syndrome. And so the question of disability and healing is very prominent in his work. In particular, he writes about how people in his community have prayed for his brother's healing of Down syndrome. So if we think in terms of like the resurrection, it's like he asks, will my brother have Down syndrome in the resurrection? And so he says his conclusion is he thinks that he will, because that's part of who his brother is. And the point that he makes that I think is really significant is he says, when people come to his brother, or anyone who, like the person who's asking for healing for them thinks that they need healing, if they don't, what he says is rather than praying for this other person to be healed of how they are, maybe the person who's asking for the prayer should really be asking to be healed of their failure to appreciate how this person was made, and how they're beloved in God's sight.
Yeah, so I don't believe, for example, autism is something to be healed. I believe it is part of someone's identity. But other things where there's a physical lack, though someone may have adjusted to that to be part of their identity, if they really want a healing from that, particularly if there's pain and so on, that that is something they could reach into God for.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really important point about pain. It's like, is this something that's causing the person distress? And what is it that they really want to be healed, and what's causing the problem? So what's interesting about this passage that we talked about before we started recording is that I was reading the NRSV translation, and in that translation, the man's saying he wants to regain his sight, and that his sight was restored. But the NIV doesn't say that. It just says that he wants to receive sight, and he received sight. And the Greek actually doesn't specify whether the man had been able to see before or not. And so, you know, I'm thinking in terms of like, if someone had an ability that was then lost, and so they had, you know, a memory of being able to function in a way that they couldn't now, I can understand them wanting that to be restored. But then you have different stories like the man who was born blind. And so he would have always, his experience would have always been going through the world not sighted. So I think those are important points too, and important things to think about.
I think there are important ways in which our world is different to the world of Jesus, and that someone would not have been, you know, he was obviously in this story either he's there begging for money, he's not able to work and get an income, and so he's not, you know, he's in a lot of ways excluded from society, and so were for example, the people with leprosy that Jesus healed. Was that exclusion from society, and that Jesus was restoring them and enabling them to have a more fulfilled life is very important. But there's also, I think, the role of technology is quite an important one, that today we can bring healing through medical technology, and that doesn't deny the healing in the same pattern, I don't think, as we see in Jesus. But again, some terrible things that have been done is when people say, "Oh, you don't need to go for that that healing through medicine. You can just believe God," and I think that can be really dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such an important point. And I think a big part of the issue gets back to this kind of this artificial separation we have between like spirit and body, or the spiritual and the physical and the scientific. And yeah, it's all about the whole person. And so like when you mentioned about how people who had disabilities in this Greco-Roman culture, they were cut off, you know, from their communities. So like this beggar had to be outside the community, and it's about the way that we're restored to relationships, you know. So there's the curing or the healing of the illness in the body, but also the restoration to larger relationships and community. That's so important. And in terms of the scientific, we have this like artificial separation of like the medical and like the spiritual, and you see more movements toward understanding that, you know, the body and the mind and the spirit, they're really all connected, and you can't cut them apart that way. I think we also have this like division between the natural and the supernatural, as though they like exist as separate things. Whereas, you know, maybe it would be more helpful to think in terms of a more expanded understanding of the natural. It's like not like you have like the natural world and then occasionally, you know, God swoops into it, but really the whole world exists within this framework that is the life of God that we participate in. And so God always extends, you know, God is always beyond what we can imagine. But there isn't like, it isn't like we live in the natural world and then occasionally God like jumps in and intervenes. It's like God is always undergirding and, you know, leading and inviting. So I think it helps a lot to like break down some of those binaries that we think about.
oceans deep, my faith will stand, and I will call upon your name, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace.
that brings us to the end of today's reflection. Thank you for being with us. Next week, we will be at Open Table with Wild Green URC, both online and in person at 3 o'clock. At 5 o'clock on Zoom, we're joining Asperger's Heroes for our monthly Neurodiverse Spirituality workshop. On the 22nd of May, we will be back at the Edgbaston Quaker Meeting House for Real Talk, where we will be thinking about calling, and there will be another opportunity to bring food for our collection. On the 29th of May at 9:30, we will be back at the Boston Tea Party. But until next week, we will close with our blessing. May we live fully. May we love wastefully. And may we have the courage to be all that God has created us to be. Amen.